NBC's Garrett Haake is following all of this from Washington. Joyce Vance is a former U.S. attorney, law professor at the University of Alabama, and an MSNBC legal analyst. Jim Messina was White House Deputy Chief of Staff under President Obama and ran his 2012 campaign. Good to have all of you here. Garrett, break down this potential witness list for us.
Well, Chris, the boldface names won't be surprising. They start with Michael Cohen at the very top of this list, the person who allegedly orchestrated all of these hush money payments, and the two women to whom he orchestrated them for, Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, expected to appear. We've got a couple of executives from American Media, the company sort of in the middle of this, essentially buying their stories. And the folks that I'm more interested in a little bit down the line, some of these former Trump campaign and Trump White House staffers like Hope Hicks and Madeleine Westerhout, who will be able to describe exactly what was going on within the Trump campaign and later the Trump White House around this story that might buttress the prosecution's case that this was done for political reasons for Donald Trump. Now, the most interesting possible defense witness, of course, is Donald Trump himself. That's not confirmed. It's not something that his lawyers will say one way or the other will definitely appear. But, you know, knowing Donald Trump, covering Donald Trump, and the way he has approached all of these cases, I think it would be very hard to keep him off the stand if he decides that he wants to testify. And I suspect after listening to the testimony against him through the prosecution's presentation, he'll be champing at the bit to get up there and tell his side of the story, Chris.
So, Jim, do you agree with that? What do you think the chances are he takes the stand? And whatever the decision is, do you think it will be one based on legal facts, or will it be more about political considerations and ego?
No, this is all about political considerations and ego, Chris, because he's looking at these same numbers, and to have 2/3 of independent voters saying that they are going to look at this, and if he's convicted, judge him harshly and perhaps not vote for him, that's a 5-alarm fire in Trump world. And so, you know, they've been campaigning from the courthouse for the last couple of months. It's now even more important right now, Chris, because voters are starting to pay attention. These swing voters who haven't been paying attention are starting to wake up to the fact that they're going to have a choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And as they start making this choice, the last thing Donald Trump wants to hear is guilty.
So I'll get to you on Donald Trump, but let me ask you a big picture question first, Joyce, if I can. Are there any names here that surprise you? And what does this list tell you about how the prosecution plans to build its case?
So this list is surprising in no way, Chris. This is exactly the case the Manhattan DA has been suggesting that they would bring since they indicted it. It is a case that will focus on election interference, not, as Trump has tried to say, just bookkeeping errors. And I think some of the most interesting testimony that especially the campaign witnesses that Garrett was talking about that they may bring on is we've heard this story that Trump, after the fact, said, do I still have to pay Stormy Daniels? I've won. It's not an issue anymore. And that suggests that he was worried about the campaign, not about his wife Melania's feelings, which is one of the public defenses he's put out.
And if you were a betting woman, and I know you deal in facts and the law, do you think Donald Trump will take the stand?
Well, Jim makes such an interesting point, which is that Trump may view this as a calculus about winning the presidency. For his lawyers, though, this will be a calculation about whether he will be convicted and spend time in prison following that conviction. And they will strongly urge Trump not to take the witness stand. We know he's a terrible witness. This is the man who, in the E. Jean Carroll civil defamation case, during a deposition, misidentified E. Jean Carroll, the victim, as his former wife, Marla Maples, after saying E. Jean Carroll was not his wife. There is no telling how much damage he can do to himself on the witness stand, and very little good. But Trump may see it entirely differently. You know, those voter numbers suggest, Chris, I mean, this is just going into the trial. This is before there's any public reporting on just how bad this evidence is for Donald Trump. So surely he'll be concerned, but his lawyers will tell him to set that aside and stay off the witness stand. He can only harm himself by testifying.
Let's talk, Garrett, a little bit about how many times and in how many ways Donald Trump has tried to stop this trial from happening, or at least delay it. 11 times, by our count. He's either tried to get it tossed or delayed. The New York Times calls these attempts desperate, the approach scattershot. From what you're hearing in Trump world, and particularly the legal team, do they think they still have something that might work?
attempts to delay the trial is less likely to work than the one before it. But you have to remember the way Donald Trump interacts with his lawyers going back really across his entire public career. You know, to Joyce's point about whether or not he'd testify, Donald Trump sets the agenda here, and then his lawyers try to make that possible. It is a very rare occurrence when he simply listens to his lawyer's advice and then takes it. And I think what you have here is someone who very much does not want to see this trial go forward, certainly doesn't want to see it go forward before the election. And in fact, he was questioned about this a couple weeks ago at this news conference he held at 40 Wall Street after he was last in court. I was there, and one of the questions he took was around this idea of, if you're so confident you can beat this case, why do you keep pushing it off? He will say that he thinks it's unfair that this happens during the middle of a presidential election. But I think the reality here is that any delay here that he can possibly engender in this case accrues to his benefit both politically and, as defense lawyers will tell you, delay almost always serves the defense's advantage. Eventually, these things start to fade from memory, feel less important, and a defense case tends to get stronger.
There are people, Jim, and I think obviously mostly Donald Trump supporters, who believe that this will help him no matter what. And I think it's in this sense that should he lose this case, it's the one with the least serious potential consequences. And so he can say the system is rigged. It's a witch hunt. This is an example of how they've been going after me. And should he actually be acquitted, he says the same, but maybe even a little more loudly. Do you see any way in which whatever happens, Donald Trump, who has had a real penchant for being, if not the most, one of the most Teflon politicians we've ever seen in the United States, that this could work the same way?
Chris, he is the most Teflon candidate we've seen in American political history, at least recent history. And I think there are two ways he can advantage this. One is he's going to raise money off of this. And you've seen in other court appearances, their online fundraising spiked during these things. So he's going to continue to do this. And if he were able to get a acquittal here, he could say this entire thing is a scam and rigged, and make the case to swing voters that you shouldn't care about these other cases that are coming out of this. That said, let's be honest, we're 200 days out here. Every day you're spending having swing voters watch you in the courthouse is never going to be a good day for a presidential campaign.
Joyce, we should also note that we are still waiting on two, I think, very long shot attempts to delay. Judge Merchan has yet to rule on a request that he step aside, although he has rejected that previously. There's also that filing where Team Trump claims that the former president can't get a fair trial because of what they call prejudicial media coverage. I say long shot. How long, in your opinion, are these two attempts that may still be out there?
Pretty long, Chris. I think that these motions are both stone cold losers. And Trump is down to sort of the last desperate gasp of defendants who don't want to go to trial, fire your lawyers, or have a sudden traumatic illness. I think it's all but certain that the judges understand what's going on with these motions, understand what Trump's strategy is, and that they're done facilitating it. We've seen that in very quick rulings from New York appellate judges slapping down his last-minute requests.
Fire your lawyers or sudden traumatic health problems. Okay, Joyce Vance, Garrett Haake, Jim Messina, great conversation.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.